welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show. I'm your host, Alex Theuma, founder of SaaStock. Delighted to kick off the first podcast recording of 2023. And I've got somebody that we known for, well, perhaps pre-SaaStock era. My guest today is John Collins, who is the former head of content at Ramp, one of the fastest growing SaaS companies of recent times, the former head of content at Intercom, and now independent advisors, B2B companies, probably around content, I guess, John.
Pretty much content, top of funnel, organic marketing. But yeah, I mean, everyone wants to try and crack content marketing, right? So exactly. That's definitely what clients come to me for.
Good stuff. Well, look, it's taken 8 years, but great to have you on the podcast finally. And also, I mean, talking largely, we'll talk about content marketing, no surprises, which, you know, whilst I'm CEO of SaaStock, it's probably my favorite area of business to, and where SaaStock came from, right? Yeah. We came from content marketing. So excited for this. And so tell the audience, you know, obviously I did a very short intro to you, but who is John Collins, you know, as a person, you know, who are you, John?
Who am I? That's a very deep question to start with in the depths of January when we're all feeling a little bit down, but who am I? So yeah, like I'm an Irishman based in Dublin, was a journalist for almost 20 years. Always interested in media. Actually, I had a sort of a brief period working in content in the first Web 1.0 or the .com boom era, but mostly worked as a journalist. And then about 10 years ago, pivoted into the SaaS world with Intercom, and established the content function there, and sort of built that out, and spent about 7 or 8 years at Intercom, and then moved to Ramp, where I headed up content and comms, and yeah, saw phenomenal growth there. I mean, they're definitely one of the fastest growing fintech companies of the last few years. And since the summer, I've been working as a consultant and advisor to B2B companies, doing a bit of investing on the side. So yeah, and yeah, what else can I tell you about me? Yeah, as I said, Dublin-based, married, 2 kids. Well, they're not kids anymore, grown up nearly. Yeah, that's me.
Are you into cycling? I feel like I see you're a cyclist on social media.
Yeah. Cycling's the new golf, isn't it? It's kind of like the thing that men of a certain age and a certain job type tend to do. So yeah, I'm one of those mammals who goes out most weekends. Done a lot of cycling in France and stuff as well, but yeah, I love getting out on the bike. Used to be a runner, but as you get older, your knees start to give out, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, I need to. It's one of these things. It's not actually a New Year's resolution for me this year, but I need to buy a bike. And then I live by the coast, and there's fantastic coastline to explore. Jump on the bike. But one thing, and maybe it's just me, and I don't know if this is something that you've overcome, but I kind of worry about, I hear about all these bike accidents and like going really fast and going around corners and, country lanes. And it kind of scares me a little bit, John. Have you experienced this in Ireland, and how have you overcome that, or would you recommend?
Yeah, I suppose. Well, I mean, I think I got into cycling first as a kind of a commuter, and I do remember actually when I was in San Francisco the first time with Intercom, and I was there for 2 weeks. So I hired a bike and cycling down Market Street with a few colleagues, and they were like, "Oh, this is really hairy and dangerous." And I kind of cycled down and went, compared to cycling through Dublin and dodging buses in our narrow streets that we have in Dublin, I was like, this is a cakewalk. So I think maybe having done that commuting thing first, it kind of inured me a bit to the risks. But also I actually, and this is something, as you get older in life, you're like, oh, join a club, but I actually joined a cycling club, and just, you pick up so much cycling in a group, and so many sort of tips and tricks, and just how to be safe and build a bit of confidence. So that's been huge as well.
Yeah, and I've heard. I mean, you did say, and this is obviously not a podcast about cycling, so we'll move on quickly. But you did say it's like the new golf, and my brother-in-law sort of mentioned around cycling and how beneficial it has been from a networking perspective, because you kind of meet like-minded people, but it's a great sort of opportunity. So he's met like really good people from joining cycling clubs, and recommended it. But moving on from,
I'm amazed more people don't sponsor cycling stuff. In terms of like when you think about tech companies back in the day that do golf outings and stuff. Definitely, if someone's in events and wants a good tip, maybe that's a good one.
SaaStock Cycling Club coming to a city near you. And cool. So, John, like you talked about Intercom, talked about San Francisco. there, and actually like how we kind of like first sort of connected, and going back to like origin stories of SaaStock. And for the audience, hopefully some will know, some don't. But before SaaStock was, an events and media business, and even called SaaStock, we were called SaaScribe, and the idea was that I wanted to kind of launch a kind of a magazine for SaaS, but like I didn't really have the wherewithal, at the time. So it started, with a blog. Got a little bit of traction in the kind of the early days. Didn't really know what I was doing so much, but I got an email one day from a gentleman called Aaron Foreman, and he was like, "Yeah, I like what you're doing. I'm rooting for you." I don't know if Aaron speaks like that, but it was kind of more in a
kind of does
his kind of his accent. And yeah, Aaron was like heading up, I think, comms or like PR or something at Intercom at the time. And we was just, so we connected, and I was then sort of like asking for, I think, a little bit of advice. And he said, "Look, I'll introduce you to John Collins." I emailed you, and then you very kindly said, "Yeah, I can give up some time, and have a chat with you," which I really appreciated. And so when I was in Dublin, I came to the Intercom offices, kind of walked in. I thought I was in a nightclub, and I was like very, very impressed. But we had a good chat for like, I don't know, 45 minutes or an hour or something like that. And hopefully, I think I took on board some of the great feedback. But they're then kind of sharing how like we connected, kind of like 8 years ago, and actually, yeah, I think just like the value and the things that I kind of took on board from that was somebody that really didn't know about me, content marketing, getting involved, and really kind of how that played a part, in the beginning of SaaStock. So unfortunately, we didn't give any shares, but it was a short meeting. But no, I want to say, obviously I do appreciate that. And I may have said that before, but, I think here for people that are kind of listening, I think it's a really nice thing, certainly within SaaS or outside, that ability to pay it forward if you have it, right? And there are so many, entrepreneurs that are kind of, like, I don't know, pre-revenue, or they've got an idea. And I know time is precious, and, the power of saying no is important. But sometimes, if you say yes and you take that meeting, it can really help people out. So I think it's great that you had that pay it forward spirit and mentality, and certainly helped me and maybe many others. So
thanks for that. But I mean, I think and it probably comes a little bit from the Irish thing, where you realize the world is kind of small, and if you do pay it forward, it does come back. I think you need to set some parameters as well. I think you can't say yes to everyone, but I think if you sort of clear to people, like, actually, I think it was Des Traynor said this to me once. He used to say, like, you get a huge amount of requests for people for coffee meetings and stuff, and he'd say, like, well, generally I say to people, look, meet me first thing in the morning for coffee. If you're willing to meet me at 8:39 in the morning, and it kind of, like, a lot of the messers and time wasters, it kind of filters them out. If you just kind of like at least make the bar slightly high, so that there's some kind of natural filter. But I mean, it was clear you had interviewed Owen at that stage for SaaScribe, and it was clear you were passionate and like trying to do something different, and actually try and, like, at that stage, I think, not from a media perspective, because I think there was like a lot of media around tech at that point, and the media landscape was a lot better than it is now around tech, but it was clear that, like, you were kind of somewhat an insider and really wanted to sort of like highlight the interesting stories that were coming out of SaaS. So it was kind of like it was a no-brainer to sort of go, hey, let's give this guy a bit of time and a bit of a steer. It's not a major investment from our side.
Yeah, no, appreciate that, and it did come back 8 years later. And I was actually thinking, and I'm sure I was probably subconsciously thinking about that podcast that I did with Owen like earlier today, and I remember that we did the podcast. I thought it went quite well, but I was very inexperienced at the time. And then we published it, and he didn't promote it. And I was kind of wondering why, like, he didn't promote it. And then I kind of reached out to him, and he came back, and it's like, yeah, the interview was really good, but I really hate the intro music, so I didn't want to promote it. And I was like, oh, come on, man. And then I think he did at some point, but I just remember that story. I found it sort of quite funny. Anyway, so look, you worked at Intercom for a long time. Owen is back as well. Speaking of Owen, how many years were you at Intercom?
Just over 7 years.
7 years.
Yeah, so joined pretty early on. It was just past $1 million in ARR. I think the company was about 2.5 years old.
Yeah, and as you said, you built out the content marketing kind of function or machine. Mm-hmm. And I remember sort of during those days, which was not that long ago, that there was, and maybe there still is, I don't know, I don't see it as much, but a real cult-like following about the Intercom sort of like content. Like you guys were really kind of, you raised the bar, leading the way, at the time. I think now there's so much content marketing out there that perhaps, I'm not seeing it, as much, but we'll go into the next part. But tell us a little bit then, like you came in, there were $1 million ARR. Like, how did you build? What were the steps that you took to build, the Intercom content machine, and maybe some lessons from that?
Yeah, sure. So I think the big thing was that when I came in, Des and to a lesser extent Des Traynor, the chief strategy officer and own CEO, had been effectively running the blog themselves. Des in particular, Des wrote the first 93 of 100 blog posts on Inside Intercom, and then been getting a lot of traction. I think that maybe you're getting like sort of probably like 3,000 page views or something a week. It was decent traffic. They were definitely like their profile internationally as well was, I think, probably much higher than it would have been without it. They were sharing a lot of the lessons learned of building a product and building a product-like company. And so it was, as you said, like sort of to build a machine. It was like, how do we operationalize this so that we can actually really scale content, not just production, but everything that goes around it. And I think the struggle they'd had up to then was finding someone who wasn't just going to scale content, but was going to scale up but still keep the quality and all that like subject matter expertise that they had, and they invested in all the pieces they did. HubSpot was probably like the leading example. HubSpot and Buffer, I think, probably the leading examples at the time, but they were very SEO driven. Like it was like a lot of content, but it wasn't super deep. It was really, really wide, like really comprehensive, but not that deep. And like obviously that's a very valid strategy that works really well. You can't knock either of those companies in terms of what they're doing, but we obviously wanted to stand out as well. Like as a sort of a startup and with no sort of reputation, how do you need to do something different to stand out? And so our whole thing was like quality content. We were always trying to get the subject matter experts on the blog, so whether that meant ghostwriting or interviewing people internally and putting stuff out with their name on it, but like it was really trying to figure out how can we scale that up and start to like go from probably what was like publishing once a week to publishing more often, to starting to think about things like books and gated content and podcasts. And that's really what I did. It was taking a lot of what I knew as a journalist in terms of like how to produce, like create an editorial machine, just simple things like having calendars and production processes and making it clear to people like, okay, we've got a draft. Now we're going to move on to like second draft, and then we're going to get pre-publication, so that just things move forward constantly. And as an editorial person, this is kind of bread and butter stuff for me, but I suppose tougher for people in a SaaS company who wouldn't have that kind of background. So that was really what it was about in the early days.
And thanks for sharing that. And then for the listeners, can you explain, like, first of all, okay, so when he came in, like Des was writing these blog posts, they're getting 3,000 page views, let's say per blog post, to when maybe 6 years later or at some, time stamp it at some point, you've got the machine running and, we have the podcast and we've got all, 5 days a week we're publishing, whatever it is. What did the web traffic look like at that point? And then strategically, why did Intercom, invest in content marketing like it did? Like what was for them the reward, in terms of, let's say, inbound marketing strategy, leads, etc. Why would a SaaS company do that? I mean, we think it's obvious, but let's teach some people to suck eggs.
Sure, yeah. So I suppose the blog was kind of like the real top of funnel play, and it really was about like trying to generate traffic and interest. We probably scaled that to, from memory, so like north of 150,000 page views a month. We did at one stage we're publishing 5 days a week, but we pulled back a little from that because you can definitely have too much of a good thing. But there's kind of two things. It was like you can do with content. It's like build your brand and generate leads. And so in terms of the brand building, the blog was definitely all about that. Inside Intercom then became the event series that we did, where we did world tours and all sorts of things like that. And we brought, effectively, it was like a live version of the blog coming to people's cities. And obviously, I had a very good partner on the event side. But I, like myself and my team, worked very closely in terms of like programming the content for that. Like we thought of events as live content, and it wasn't just about, we wanted to make sure that, yes, we're in amazing venues and like production values are really high, but like also people would just get interesting content when they attended them. So, definitely we were investing to build a brand, but then also we wanted to generate leads. And so that was when we started to layer on things like gated content. So books were a huge thing for us. Again, looking at what was out there, there was a lot of people producing ebooks, but like there might be like a 20-page PDF, and you have to fill out this huge form to download it. Job title and your mother's maiden name and God knows what else. It was like hey, look, we're going to produce a book. It's going to be at least 20,000 words. It's going to be available as a PDF, an EPUB, a .mobi. It's going to have an ISSN number, like a proper barcode. It's a registered book at the Library of Congress. Like this will feel like it's a real fair value exchange, and that's a huge piece that with content, that people feel like that it's not just you're doing the bare minimum to get an email address and get a lead. That actually you're giving them something of big value in exchange. And even just things like we gated them, but like we asked for an email address and name and an email address, but certainly weren't looking for loads and loads of personal information. It was really, and then using that the content we already had then to kind of nurture those leads and hopefully warm them up to the point where they purchased Intercom. But yeah, and that, also I suppose by the time I left, content had grown to sort of do things like sales enablement as well. So, we had this content machine, we were producing a huge amount of content, but how do we scale things like customer evidence, white papers and things like that sales team needed as well. So that was a huge part of what we did, and partnered very closely with product marketing on all that side of things as well.
And you went from being that first, I guess, building out the content marketing machine at Intercom, and from 1 million ARR through to, probably north of 100, certainly by the time you left. And then going to Ramp, which was one of the fastest growing, SaaS companies, certainly the last couple of years that we're aware of. So you join, a unicorn business, but to join another very fast growing sort of unicorn business. How was that sort of like different for you? Because obviously they've probably been doing, I would imagine, like content marketing for a little while. So what was the difference in coming in terms of like what you needed to do? And then what were the lessons that you learned from, what you did, and what did you do differently, at Ramp?
So it was interesting, actually. Ramp was probably around the same stage in terms of the size of the company. I think it was like 65 people or something when I joined. And actually similarly, I think I was the third hire in marketing. And so it's a similar stage in that regard. But I think like Ramp was a unicorn at that point. Literally just as I joined, we did the double series B. Anyway, so with a lot of money a lot more money in the bank, probably further on in terms of product development as well. But it was a very different kind of product, and it was a very different kind of space we were trying to sell into. So for people who don't know, Ramp has a charge card, a credit card. But that's kind of like the Trojan horse to get in there. It's like your business credit card, but actually they have like a whole software suite in the background that helps you manage your spending, like pretty much everything except payroll. So you can do expense management, you can pay your bills, all that kind of stuff. So like we were trying to sell to founders, CEOs, CFOs, but equally we were also trying to, like, it was the finance team who were going to be in that tool all the time. And like, if you think about it, once you get a card into a company starts using a card, it's one thing to take on the card, but you have to transfer your spend to that card from your existing solution, etc. So we also had a huge opportunity in terms of engaging with the finance team and making sure it was easy for them to do all that stuff. So, and I think less of it, like we definitely we're trying to build it in somewhat, but unlike Intercom, I don't think there was as much, product managers and founders who were in the early days of Intercom. Like we were producing content for them, and they were like a little bit religious about it in terms of sharing it and like wanting to learn more from Intercom. I don't think there was going to be the same thing around a finance tool, and really kind of settled on sort of, if you think about it, you're frustrated with your current card. What are you going to do? You try and ask your peers what they've got, or you actually start doing some Google research. And so SEO and customer evidence, actually finding like great stories in our customers was huge. Actually, Ramp is kind of interesting. Obviously, people talk about the competition with Brex a lot, but Brex was way more focused on startups. And I think what was interesting at Ramp was they had like a lot of these very traditional sort of businesses across America who were like really getting great use out of the platform. So like one of their biggest customers was Walter Farms, which is like one of the biggest chain of potato farms in the US. And so I was really trying to get like expose the wealth of customer stories we had there, and how customers are getting value out of it, and a big SEO play. Really trying to not necessarily rank for huge volume keywords, but like really high intent keywords that like, so less so, things like how to prepare a budget or whatever, which like your average SEO agency would come in and talk to fintech about. And more stuff that showed like people are starting to get frustrated with their current situations. Maybe they're searching for things like, how to get more out of my like credit card points or stuff like that. Yeah,
very cool.
Quite different
Thanks
strategy.
So thanks for sharing that. And then obviously now you're moving into advising.
Mm-hmm.
Why move into advising? What sort of companies are you working with? And like if you're listening to this, like why, like what sort of company you should reach out to?
Well, given obviously the background with Intercom and Ramp, mostly working with B2B companies, mostly kind of in the SaaS space. Really just I suppose two reasons for the change for me. Like flexibility. Definitely had a long run at like almost 10 years in two very high growth companies, and that's it's pretty full on. So definitely enjoy the flexibility of being able to sort of manage my own time a bit better working for clients. But also I'm definitely someone who likes to start things and do new things and learn about new things, and so it's just a great opportunity to get exposed to the different kinds of problems people have and how they're trying to solve them with content, and figuring out where I can add value and help them sort of do content that actually moves the needle for them. Like, interesting, I'm working with a client at the moment, and they came to me because basically they over lockdown and COVID period, they like really increased their content production, and it was like, oh, great, we've like 4x traffic, but their organic leads have like sort of stalled and in fact gone down slightly, and it's like, okay, what are we doing wrong here? And I love just getting stuck into those kind of problems and figuring out how to help people turn that around.
Very cool. So we're going to, well, the title of the podcast is called "Have We Reached Peak Content in SaaS?" So have we?
Yes.
The end. Yeah.
No, I mean, like we chatted previously about this, and I think we both thought it was kind of an interesting topic. But like, look at every SaaS startup. They will invariably have a blog and a podcast at this stage. Everyone, like, it's great to see the difference over the last decade, that like content marketing now really is considered one of the main pillars of marketing. Everyone sees, the advantage to it. I think the economic climate in the last year or two has really moved towards that. Like, everyone's trying to get away from paid acquisition and really get much more organic acquisition of leads and customers. So clearly there's been even bigger investments in content, but the reality is, like, there's just a lot of it just doesn't stand out. It doesn't get traffic, and it doesn't perform for folks. And I think it's kind of there's a lot of people like me coming around helping people produce content, and and that's actually something I don't do. I don't sort of get my hands dirty in terms of producing content. I will definitely help people put in place the structures and the agencies or freelancers or even in-house people to produce the content. But I don't think that's the problem. I think a lot of people just don't have a strong strategy and figure out like how they're going to get traffic to that content, how they're going to like convert that traffic once it gets onto their site, and really just how to stand out amongst the noise. I mean, there's just so much stuff, and it's not, as I always say as well, you're not just competing with other B2B SaaS content, you're just competing for people's attention. And there's just so much stuff for us to consume these days. It's kind of, we're all trying to spend a bit less time glued on our phones and stuff, but we keep getting drawn in, and there's a lot of mindless content that sucks our attention.
So I mean, I agree with all of that. And let's say a couple of quick, like on the podcast side of things. So like this podcast is now 8 years old. Sometimes it surprised me that, pleasantly that, each week we're kind of still churning it out. But back 8 years ago, like was probably one or two podcasts that were, in the SaaS space and, of which we were one of them. Now, as you said, everybody's got a podcast, right? And which I think is also, a good thing. But if you're launching a podcast today, how do you stand out, right? I mean, like, I'm sure it's specific in many cases to the company, but like, what are maybe some of the ideas to kind of stand out? And something that I've seen, this is maybe just an observation, sort of a comment, and I don't know if this is still the case, but what I would see over the 8 years that I've been doing it, a lot of people start a podcast, realize that it just takes a really long time to kind of build an audience in general. Certainly I see. And then they give up after 6 months because they're only getting 100 people or 150 people listening to the podcast. So what are your thoughts just around that? How do you stand out given the volume of podcasts? And then like, how long should you persist until, it's not working or whatever?
Yeah, so there's a number of things I kind of like always think about. Like one thing I think is just you have to get right is decent production values. Like just genuinely having something that like people are going to be comfortable listening to that is not being recorded on an iPhone. Like make the investment. Like as you talked about, like 8 years ago there wasn't that many people in SaaS doing podcasts. We launched the Intercom podcast in 2015, and literally we said, right, we're going to do 10 episodes and just see, is there a market for this? Like, because effectively it was kind of like what is the podcast version of Inside Intercom? And so I think like we agreed a budget of like $1,000 or something, literally to get 10 episodes out. But like, I think the bulk of that was spent on like a really good microphone and like getting some soundproofing for like a little spare room we had in the office, turned it into like a studio. And like, it was quite ghetto. I mean, I remember even when we did it in San Francisco, we like literally were pasting egg trays to the wall to try and like dampen the sound. And so I think just have it. Big brands. I've heard big brands, and literally it's just not comfortable to listen to it. So that's kind of just a basic. I think the other thing is like figuring out who the guests you can get. If that's the road you're going down, interviews, like who are the highest profile guests you can get that are gonna like come with a built-in audience, because like good guests attract bigger guests. And a big thing there is like literally just start trolling LinkedIn and like obviously make sure you're connected to everyone in your startup, but like just start to look at like who are maybe someone's worked with someone previously in their career who's at like whatever it is, like at Meta or Google or I don't know, whoever, but like just someone like a name, so that you're not just it's great to like expose those lesser known voices who you're gonna have really interesting conversations with, but you do that, you can do that once you have an audience. And then just making sure it's really easy for those folks to promote and share with their networks. And again, investing a little bit in terms of design, maybe that you're giving them nice social assets or whatever it is. I think the other big thing people make a mistake is, like if podcasts like All In or, a lot of these podcasts that are more media companies that are quite popular, they go on quite a long, right? But they can because of who they are and what they're saying. I think like keep it tight, like just signal to noise, maximize that as well. If a podcast only needs to be 15 minutes, why not make it 15 minutes? There's like I would actually say I'd almost be like going shorter, like almost 10 minutes like 3 times a week rather than like longer in-depth ones. Again, that'll probably stand out right now because it's outside the norm. But again, as you said, it's really down to the individual company and thinking about like what they're trying to achieve and what they have to work with. But they're just some of the sort of parameters I think along as I think about like launching a new show.
Awesome. Yeah, a couple of points on that. One around getting, let's say, a high-profile sort of guests and the benefits. The first ever guest on the SaaS Revolution Show was Mark Roberge, and somehow managed to do that without, having a pre-existing audience, and that certainly helped. And for many years, that was the most popular episode
Yeah.
of the podcast. So,
and also in terms of getting other guests,
Exactly.
you're knocking on people's door then, and they're like, who else has been on the podcast? And it's like, well, it's a no-brainer
Exactly.
then. Once you've had Mark Roberge, you can
E-
most people are going to say yes.
Exactly. And then, and rather embarrassingly, and this is like an apology to the listeners, we still have the same intro that we had 3-4 years ago, where I recorded it on my, iPhone headphones or whatever. They weren't even, AirPods. And we are replacing it this year. We are updating. We are leveling up the podcast, certainly intro and hopefully across many other things. So definitely I agree. Like, the production quality of podcasts has really kind of gone up from, as you say, this kind of like the ghetto types of like stitching it together, and people's expectations are kind of much higher. So for sure. And then the last part on like keeping it short. Yeah, interestingly, I mean, there's one podcast I occasionally listen to, which is Eric Sue's podcast, which I think is called Leveling Up. And they're like 7-minute episodes or something like that. And you can just like digest a few of them, learn something new very quickly. And yeah, it's quite interesting versus when I'm on my commute, I listen to All In, and generally because the commute is an hour and a half, I get it done. But again, they've got 4 like amazing people on there. But yeah, good stuff. So what about SEO? So we mentioned like SEO a little bit. Thoughts on SEO as a strategy? Because obviously with Intercom, you did quality over quantity. I know some companies, and you mentioned HubSpot, being one, where SEO works really well. We're thinking obviously about our content marketing strategy and, SEO versus kind of like quality. So what are Sir John Collins' thoughts on SEO as a strategy?
Yeah, so it's a definitely a tough one to balance, particularly if you're kind of going on a quality content push, and then you have to have these quite definitional SEO articles to rank, which can seem quite beginner level. So like definitely always try and think about like, is there a way to publish that content that makes sense for humans as well as the algorithm? So whether it's like create a glossary or something like where it makes sense that, hey, here's our academy, our our foundation level intro to the space we're in, yet you kind of have the thought leadership or the like opinionated content sitting somewhere else, so they're not two of them sitting in together, which can be quite jarring for people. I do think that, like we've seen with all the updates from Google in recent times, it's basically just rewarding sites with better content, better quality content, and that are not trying to play the game. Like Google, even compared to like 4 or 5 years ago, is way more sophisticated. The other thing I would say is like there's definitely big opportunities in sort of programmatic SEO of like, really trying to produce high volume, almost templated SEO pages that make sense. I mean, obviously the likes of Canva and people have done it over the years. Zapier as well, I think, done that really successfully. But like even now, like a company like Do Not Pay, I think is a really interesting example how they have massively scaled SEO. And quite often that's a matter of looking at like, is there, data in terms of like looking at your product and thinking about like, can we actually extract data here and then do scaled SEO? So like a good example, potentially, someone like Ramp, they've got spending data in terms of customers. So like, why couldn't you do a bunch of SEO pages of like, average price for business hotel in San Francisco, New York, New Orleans, blah, 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 and they're very templated pages that you can produce. You literally just have to input the data you have from your own product or platform. So I think, if you're going to do, if SEO is going to be, a major driver, I think you kind of have to come up with, something that's like really, really going to scale. I think the standard sort of like, let's find the top 100 keywords and go like, what is spend management? That's tough. And I find it less and less successful as Google's got more and more sophisticated.
What are your thoughts on SaaS companies buying like communities and media companies? I think like last year, certainly saw like a little bit of a buzz around that. Obviously HubSpot bought The Hustle. I don't know if that was last year or the year before.
Yeah.
Pendo bought Mind the Product. Outreach bought Sales Hacker quite a few years ago. There's some of these kind of like examples, and it's not necessarily like really taken fire, but certainly we've seen, companies do that. What are your thoughts on it? And if you were doing Intercom all over again, would you go out and buy communities at a media company?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's and it's interesting. Like, do you buy a media company or do you buy a community? Like, are you buying them for their audience and the sort of like the community that's around the content, or is it like for the actual content itself?
Yeah,
And I think, it's interesting because the examples are, they are pretty unique, and there are different reasons why those companies, and they were at the very different stages. So I think it can work, but I don't think it's a blanket, it necessarily can work for everyone. The other thing I would say, like a big part of content, and I've always found, is like you're trying to expose the people in your company. You're trying to, and kind of show the humans behind it a bit more, because like even in B2B, people want to have some kind of emotional connection to the product, right? It's not purely just like, oh, this is the cheapest thing out there. You're generally going to have competition. And so I think a big part of the differentiation is that people like buy into the brand and the people behind the brand. And so if you're grafting on an external media company, that can be really hard to do.
Yeah, no, good point. And actually, like with Intercom, obviously you did do that. And I remember sort of all content wasn't just by Des Traynor, where you see like, and I don't know if they've transitioned away, even though they've done content marketing really well. But like with Profitwell, everything is Patrick Campbell written, but some of it is, I'm sure is ghost written. But with Intercom, we got to know a number of people like within the company, like Paul Adams, for instance, and there were some others, but can't name them. But very sort of like interesting approach to it. And then let's move on to the sort of quickish fire round now, John. What one thing has moved the needle the most for you in your career?
Probably realizing I had transferable skills. I think there's so many talented people in media, and they're going through a tough time. And people, I definitely found when I transitioned out of media, a lot of people are like, "How did you do it? Why did you do it?" But just realizing the skills I had could be used in new contexts and new industries, which was huge.
What's the best advice you've ever received?
Probably best business advice actually was way back when. I age myself now. I edited a magazine, a PC magazine, back in the 90s, and we used to go to trade shows, and a lot of people would be giving out freebies and stuff. And our publisher always said we'd give out back issues of the magazine, but we would charge £1. And his whole thing was like, you can't start charging. If you've given something for people for free, that they'll never start paying for it. And I think, much later in the Web 2.0 era, there was that famous blog post, The Penny Gap, about how to get your customers to go from paying nothing to paying something. And I just think, even in terms of like, I've never had an unpaid intern, for instance. I just think that, if what you do has value, you should charge from it from day one. I think it's fine, obviously, if you've different model for monetizing, but it's really stood by me to sort of think like, even if it's only a token payment or some kind of token consideration, that you should always charge for what you do.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And sometimes I would get, maybe this is like a founder bias, but a little bit offended by people asking, like for free things, free tickets or whatever to SaaStock, where I'm saying, well, look, the team is working a whole year, creating the value, and like, you want to come for free, and it used to piss me off, less so these days, but yeah, good stuff. What about biggest failure you've made, or and lesson learned? It can be mistake, but failure is quite a strong word.
Probably, I would say, and it'll probably surprise people who know me because they probably think I'm quite a little bit of an outspoken person, but just not speaking up sometimes, and sort of assuming that you don't have the knowledge or the domain knowledge to kind of go, whoa, hold on a second, why are we doing this? And I would definitely say, I think, without naming names or getting into individual situations, certainly in the early days of marketing and in Intercom, and in hindsight, kind of feel like probably should have call things out maybe sooner. But hey, that's you live and learn, and you get confidence as you grow in your career.
Hardest thing about being in content marketing right now, do you think?
I would say that everyone has an opinion on content, and everyone thinks they can write, which can be difficult. And so a lot of backseat drivers, I think, when you work in content.
This wasn't a question, but I thought about it, and we could do a whole other podcast. But is ChatGPT going to be a good thing for content marketing or a bad thing?
I think it's interesting. I think it's going to actually, it's going to remove a lot of the grunt work. If we're talking about like a lot of those definitional SEO posts that, have to be done sometimes, but like don't really add a lot of value, and are basically a pain in the ass to write. Take all that stuff away. But I still think opinionated quality content, and it kind of goes back to, we probably didn't go too deep on the peak content piece, but like, my advice to a lot of my clients is produce less content, but like stuff that's like got an opinion, that's you can really get behind. Do less of those things that will actually stand out. And so I think ChatGPT can look after a lot of the other stuff, and content marketers then can really, and also focus more on things like distribution and like partnerships and all that kind of stuff. That like all of it, I think content marketers generally come from a content production background, and so our nature is to kind of focus on those, like producing the stuff, but less so thinking about how we're going to, you know, make that stuff work for the business and get it seen by people.
Now you've got some more flexibility with your time as an advisor to SaaS companies. What does your daily routine look like?
Yeah, so I'm like most people, I think, like have a real tendency. You know, I found the early days I was like, you know, well, the early days of working for myself, you know, it was like I'd be kind of busy all the time, but like would never get as much done as I wanted to. So I've actually just got into the habit of sort of blocking out like time and say, you know, I'm going to do a half day on this, a half day on that. Like yesterday was my like meetings day. So I had like 4 meetings, in-person meetings in town, which is great to be back to in-person meetings. Seems to be finally back to normal on that front. You know, so really, there's not a typical day, but there's like blocks, as I say, you know, I'll do like, okay, I'm spending a half a day on this client today. You know, and I also just do try and like make sure I have time for, you know, do stuff, family stuff, and get out on the bike maybe during the week and stuff like that, which is definitely the joy of the flexibility.
Good stuff. Well, John, where can people find you online if they want to speak to you about content marketing, anything you've mentioned on the podcast, or perhaps even, you know, inquire what is your rate as an advisor?
Yeah.
But yeah, where can they reach out to you?
Sure. I used to be a lot more active on Twitter, but I find these days that I just my headspace. It's, you know, regardless of what your opinions of like the ownership or anything like that, I think it's just you know, it can be it's not a fun place to be a lot of the times lately. So yeah, johncollins.cc actually is you'll find my website, and you know, link to my LinkedIn, which is probably the best way to get a hold of me actually from there.
Very good. Good stuff. John, great seeing you virtually. 8 years in the making, being on the podcast. Really appreciate you joining us today. We'll no doubt see you at, in Dublin, hopefully before SaaStock returns this October. Thanks so much, John Collins, for being a great guest on the SaaS Revolution Show.
Thanks, Alex.